Good. So we continue from where we stopped last time, and that was the discussion of Dido's death. We learned that Aeneas was, along with his crew, his fleet, was involuntarily swept to Carthage in North Africa by the storm of Juno, the storm that Juno had asked Aeolus, king of the winds, to rouse. And there Juno sees now the city of Carthage ruled by Dido, and she makes a pact with Venus, as it were, to unite the two peoples, the Romans, or rather the Trojans, future Romans, with the Carthaginians. In retrospect, we know that there was anything but unity between Romans and Carthaginians. The seed of which conflict was sown, mythologically at least, there and then, with the encounter of Aeneas and Dido. To ensure that Dido does indeed fall in love with Aeneas, Venus asks her son Cupid, Eros, and this is an important point, it will parallel something in the Argonautica. She asks her son Cupid to strike Dido with deadly love for Aeneas, a cursed love for Aeneas. Why so? Because it will in the end drive her mad and lead to her suicide. And this is exactly what happens. Dido finds herself maddened by that rising, uncontrollable emotion that she possesses for Aeneas. And so much so that there is a kind of an imaginary nuptial ceremony. That is, Dido believes that they are lawfully, as it were, married, because on a certain day when Trojans and Carthaginians went out on a hunt, Juno again created a storm. Everyone fled in different directions, and Aeneas and Dido found themselves alone in a cave where in practice they had sexual intercourse. It doesn't say so specifically, but we are made to understand that. And this, in Dido's mind, is in fact equal to now being inextricably linked, married, as it were, to Aeneas. Why? Because prior to Aeneas's arrival in Carthage, she had sworn chastity to the memory of her murdered first husband, Sychaeus. And now that chastity, that vow of chastity was broken. And if she remains alone, then she lost everything, both her love to Aeneas and both her chastity, which she held sacred, as it really was. And so when she learns that Aeneas is in fact leaving, she unleashes a barrage of accusations at him, and calls him perfidious and a traitor, and she speaks as one that is loving, and her love remains unrequited. And that, of course, is a cause of great emotion. And Aeneas replies in a very technical manner, I would say. He replies, well, it is not for me to decide. I am ordered by Jupiter to set sail and found a new race. I would much rather have remained in Troy. He's not saying that he would have rather to stay with Dido. No, he says that he would have preferred to remain at Troy. But this is not the case, so he must set sail. And this is the last that he ever, these are the last words that he ever speaks to Dido, because he then goes back to his ship, to his fleet, falls asleep, and then again in a dream, Mercury addresses him saying, "Why are you sleeping, Aeneas? If you tarry anymore, the Carthaginians are going to attack you. Set sail immediately." And then and there, the entire Trojan fleet sails away. Dido sees this. She is utterly distraught, and she famously curses Aeneas with the curse that we read last time. "Arise, some unknown avenger from my bones, who will pursue the Dardanian colonists with fire and sword." This is a prophecy of the coming of Hannibal, who we know is one of Dido's future descendants. She is Carthaginian, and Dido was the founder of Carthage. Again, we repeat that Dido herself was a refugee. She fled from Sidon. She is Sidonian Dido. She fled from Sidon due to the machinations of her evil brother Pygmalion, who murdered her husband, and she then fled Sidon and founded Carthage. So "Arise, some unknown avenger from my bones, who will pursue the Dardanian colonists with fire and sword, now or in the future, at whatever time that his strength shall be given him. I pray that," this now is a description of the conflict on all fronts, that is, shore be opposed to shore, waves to water, arms to arms, let them fight themselves and their descendants. And it is now, after having delivered her curse of future enmity between Trojans and Carthaginians, that Dido is finally resolved to put an end to her own life. Now, this is something that she had conceived before that. She knew that she was going to commit suicide, and she had fooled, deceived all those around her, including, first and foremost, her beloved, loyal sister, Anna. Before the incidents that we have just discussed, Dido requested Anna to construct in one of the courtyards of her palace, to construct a pyre, that is, to stack the objects that were left by the Trojans in a pile, so that, and create an effigy of Aeneas, an image of Aeneas, place everything together so that she can burn everything, claiming that she had consulted some priestess, some strange priestess, who said that she was able to relieve Dido of her burning emotion, burning love for Aeneas, by performing this ceremony. So it is a kind of a purifying ceremony that will liberate Dido of her all-consuming love for Aeneas. That, of course, is a lie. The preparation of the pyre is, in fact, the preparation of Dido's own funeral pyre. Dido intends to be burned on that pyre, but nobody knows that. They all believe that it is a kind of ritual, a kind of ceremony that is meant to as I said, relieve Dido of her burning passion. And so now, so she spoke and turned her thoughts in all directions, considering how with all speed to break off this hated light. That is a poetic way of saying to depart this world, to depart from this world, to leave and quit this light of the world, which to her, of course, is hated. Then she spoke briefly to Barsi. Barsi is the nurse of Sychaeus. For dark ashes hid her own nurse in her former country. So in quite tragic terms, this again is perhaps the effect of Euripides, the tragedian. We said that Vergil was influenced by many sources, many previous literary sources. First and foremost, Homer, then of course the Hellenistic epic, Apollonius, Rhodius, and to a great degree also by the tragedians, and especially Euripides. And here we also have the nurse, which is usually a stock tragic character. My dear nurse, bring my sister Anna here. Tell her to hurry and to sprinkle herself with water from the river and bring the sacrificial animals and the fine offerings. So let her come, and you bind your temples with sacred ribbons. That is, everything is to be set in order so as to perform the supposed ritual of liberation from passion. Of course, the nurse is obedient, but Dido, agitated, maddened by her awful purpose. So this word here, maddened, again, we spoke of piety as the characteristic of Aeneas. Another recurrent theme in the Aeneid is the theme of madness. Madness in love, madness in war, madness in all-out killing and slaughter in battle. So here it is the madness of love, maddened by her awful purpose, rolling her bloodshot eyes. And this now is an important line because we will see that it in fact is an echo of something that is found in Apollonius Rhodius in the Argonautica. We will see it soon. Her trembling cheeks stained with red spots, yet pallid with approaching death. So she is so distraught, so distracted that her face changes its timbre, its color. It is at one time red and at another white. She is both blushing and she is both pale. Her cheeks stained with red spots, yet pallid with approaching death. So the physical appearance of Dido reflects her emotional condition, which, by the way, is a characteristic of Hellenistic epic, the Argonautica. We do not find parallel descriptions, as far as I can recall, in Homer. The description of the effect of emotion on on a hero's outer appearance. Of course, there are intimate descriptions in Homer, but he does not so much explore the how shall we say it, the pathology of the emotion and its expression as something physical, something that is evident on one's person. She rushes into the interior house, across the threshold, and she ascends, crazed, the high funeral pyre. So that pyre was really substantial. It included, as I said, objects, elements that were left by the Trojans as, mementos, as things that they will be remembered by. And she ascends crazed again. First she was maddened, now she is crazed. She ascends the high funeral pyre, and she unsheathes a Trojan sword, a gift not sought for such a purpose. So apparently the sword was left her by Aeneas, a gift. We will see immediately what use she will make of this gift, use that was not sought for in the very beginning. As she saw the Ilian clothing, now these are, the Ilian clothing is part of the things that constitute the pyre. Of course, Trojan, Ilian is Trojan. And the familiar bed, she delayed for a moment, weeping and thinking, and then she climbs up on the bed and speaks her last words. Sweet remnants, while fate and the god allowed it, take now this soul and release me from these cares. And this is one of the memorable lines. We said there are many memorable lines in the Aeneid. This is one of them. I have lived and fulfilled what course fortune decreed. Vix et quem dederat cursum fortuna peregi. That's the Latin. I have lived, and what course fortune had given me, I completed. And now my august spirit will go beneath the earth. I established a bright city, I saw its walls. Avenging my husband, I punished a hostile brother. Happy, alas, too happy, if only the Trojan ships never touched on our shores. So great were the accomplishments of Dido, and they would have stayed great had not the Trojan ships touched the shores of Africa. But they did, and now Dido is doomed. She spoke, and impressing her mouth on the couch, that same couch where she had lain with Aeneas, she said, we will die unavenged, but let us die. Just so it is pleasing to go beneath the shadows. May the cruel Trojan, that is Aeneas, drink in with his eyes this fire on the high sea, and may he bear with him the omen of our death. So Aeneas has no idea, no inkling of what is in fact taking place. He is already well on his way to the north, and she wishes that Aeneas will see the fire, and may he bear with him the omen of our death. She spoke, and her companions saw. So we here understand that there are others who behold Dido on the pyre, thinking all the time that she is just performing that strange rite, that strange ritual of liberation from passion. But then saw that in the middle of her speech, she had collapsed on the sword, and the sword was foamy with blood, and her hands were stained with blood. A shout goes up to the high walls. Rumor dances wildly through the astounded city. And now it is made evident that Dido had in fact committed suicide. And rumor starts spreading, and it reaches Anna, her sister. Her sister heard it, nearly fainting and terrified. She ran through the frenzied crowd, digging her nails into her face and striking her breasts with her fists. As Dido dies, she cries out her name. So this is what you meant, sister. Did you set out to trick me? Was this pyre of yours, these fires and altars, prepared for my sake? What first should I grieve for? Who am deserted? Did you despise in your dying to have your sister as companion? So Anna is so stricken with grief that she is even angry at Dido for not having taken her with herself to Hades, that they did not commit suicide jointly. You should have called me to the same fate. The same pain of the sword should have taken the two of us at the same hour. I even built this pyre with my own hands. Did I call aloud to our father's gods so that I would be absent? O cruel one, as you are laid out for burial, you have extinguished yourself and me too, O sister, and the people and your Sidonian ancestors and your city. Here, let me wash your wounds with water and catch whatever dying breath remains. And so she cleans Dido's wound, and of course, this is a very sad line, pathetic, that is full of pathos. She clasped her semi-conscious sister to her breast with a sigh, absorbing the dark blood with her dress. Dido tried to raise her heavy eyes, but they rolled backwards. So the wound that she had inflicted upon herself was lethal. She could not survive. And now, at the very end, the gods take pity over Dido, and it is Juno who sends Iris to, as it were, release Dido of her mortal coil, as it were, so that the soul might be free and go down to Stygian Orcus, that is to Hades, to the underworld. And so Iris, dewy wet, flies down through the skies on crocus wings, trailing 1,000 different colors across the sun. Why so? Because Iris is the rainbow. She takes her stand above Dido's head. Under orders, I take this sacred lock of hair and I release you from this body of yours. So apparently it is a sort of tradition. We do not hear of it until Vergil, that before the soul can be released from the body, a lock of hair should be taken, and this finally releases the soul. So she spoke, and she cut the hair with her right hand. All the warmth slipped away at once, and Dido's life withdrew into the winds. So this is, again, an echo of how epic heroes die and depart from this world. We saw it in the Iliad. Patroclus, his soul left the bloom of youth and went down to the underworld. So did the soul of Hector. And now it is, of course, mutatis mutandis, the soul of Dido. The warmth slipped away and Dido's life withdrew into the winds. She becomes a spirit, which, as we mentioned, Aeneas will encounter in his journey to the underworld. And even there, we said, Dido still harbors that hatred towards Aeneas and refuses to acknowledge him, refuses to speak to him. And well, one of Dido's wishes comes true very quickly. It is here that as we said, Aeneas had no idea of what was taking place. And meanwhile, the unwavering Aeneas, that's the beginning of book 5. We will not dwell on it in any way, just the beginning to show you that Aeneas has some grim realization of what had just taken place. The unwavering Aeneas held with his fleet a fixed course through the middle of the sea. He cut through the waves, darkened under a wind from the north. He looked back and saw the city walls lit with the flames from the pyre of unhappy Elissa. Elissa is another name of Dido. The cause for so great a fire was unknown, but the harsh pains from a great love gone wrong and the knowledge of what a crazed woman could do sends a deep foreboding through the hearts of the Trojans. So they do not realize, it hardly even crosses their minds, that is the Trojans' minds, that Dido might have resorted to such horrendous actions. Yet, remembering the intensity of her love and knowing how great the pain is that can result from love gone wrong, in our case, unrequited love, and also the knowledge of what a crazed woman could do, this sends a deep foreboding. That is, it is not an auspicious sign, rather it is an ominous sign of what had taken place. And it fills this sense of foreboding that something ill, something bad, terrible has happened, fills the hearts of the Trojans. But they carry on, and well, what happens next we have already discussed in the broadest of outlines when we discussed the general plot of the Aeneid. I will just say again, I will repeat, that when Aeneas visits the underworld, he encounters the spirit. He is, of course, accompanied by the Sibyl, the priestess, and also he encounters there the spirit of his father Anchises, who tells him of the destiny of the Romans, both to show mercy to those who are conquered and to fight down the proud. Good. So with this, we conclude our discussion of the Aeneid, and we now turn to one of the sources of inspiration, the great sources of inspiration, both in terms of subject matter, in terms of characterization of the general description and the course of the plot itself that inspired Vergil, and that is Apollonius of Rhodes, also known as Apollonius Rhodius. That is the Latin name, meaning Apollonius of Rhodes, and I will write it down for you. Just a second. Yes. So, Apollonius of Rhodes, that is Apollonius Rhodius, best known for the grand epic Argonautica. Now, what does it even mean, Argonautica? Argonautica is sometimes translated as Jason and the Golden Fleece, the voyage of the ship Argo, which is more precise. But really what it means is things or affairs connected with the sailing of Argo. This is the prosaic meaning of the name Argonautica. It is things or affairs connected with the sailing of the ship Argo. Now, the ship Argo is by some thought to be the first ship that ever sailed the seas. It was built by Argos, the great shipbuilder, with the divine help of none other than Athena, goddess of crafts and wisdom. Why was it built? Well, for the express purpose of sailing from mainland Greece all the way to the ends of the known world, to Colchis, present-day Georgia, at the easternmost tip of, or the easternmost shore of the Black Sea, where it was thought the world ended. There's the Caucasus mountain range there, which in ancient times was thought to be the end of the earth. Across it would be the river Ocean. So it was really one of the grandest of voyages. And why was Argo sent to sail all this way? Well, to retrieve the golden fleece and bring it back to Greece, to Hellas. Now, before we explain what the golden fleece is, we will discuss Apollonius himself. Now, the biographical details of Apollonius of Rhodes are scant and contradictory. We do know that he originally came from Alexandria in Egypt, which in the 3rd century BC was the greatest cultural center of the world, of the known world, far superseding Athens. Athens was no longer the center of cultural life. The great center was now in Alexandria, symbolized, how else, by the great library and museum that were the brainchild of Ptolemy I, king of Egypt, who of course was not Egyptian, but was one of Alexander the Great's generals, who received the kingdom of Egypt as his own. So he founded or initiated the building of the library and the museum, and the library and museum were the center of ancient science and knowledge. All that was known in the ancient world was collected and archived in that great library. It was a center of learning, of doing science, of investigating, of critically inspecting literature. It is from that place that we have the first critical editions of Homer, prepared by those who were the first heads of the library, like Xenodotus and Aristophanes of Byzantium and others, among whom also is listed Apollonius of Rhodes. So he was the chief librarian in Alexandria. We do not have the exact date of his birth, but we can more or less, based on a list of head librarians that we possess on a famous papyrus, we can date his librarianship, as it were, to the first half of the 3rd century BC. So he was probably born sometime at the end of the 4th century BC, lived out his life in the first, again, he was probably born at the end of the 2nd half of the 4th century BC, lived out his life in the first half of the 3rd century BC, and was head librarian perhaps for 20 years, say from 270 to 250 BC. Now, to become head librarian, you had to be a wonderful scholar of great merit. And Apollonius, evidently, as we see in the Argonautica, at least, which is the sole surviving work of his that we have, Apollonius was just that kind of scholar, immensely erudite, knowledgeable of faraway cultures, alien, as it were, geography, foreign customs, foreign peoples, and of course, familiar with literature and science of his day. Now, if he was born in Alexandria, why do we dub him, do we call him Apollonius of Rhodes? Well, it is here that anecdote comes in, and the story goes that he gave a recitation of the first edition, as it were, of his Argonautica, composed in Alexandria, and was the recipient of so much scorn and revilement that in shame he sailed away to Rhodes, where he reworked the epic and won great acclaim in Rhodes. Also, he became an honorary citizen of the island, upon which he returned to Alexandria with great acclaim and great recognition. And therefore, we call him Apollonius of Rhodes. It is said that he had also a literary rivalry with the person who perhaps was one of his teachers, that is Callimachus, the great Hellenistic poet, also of Alexandria. The two are said to have been literary rivals. We have no real way to ascertain that, to verify that, but this is the anecdotal tradition. We also know that Apollonius wrote technical literary treatises on, for example, Homer and other poets. He wrote foundation poems. Foundation poems are poems that describe or trace the foundation of cities. This was a genre very common in Hellenistic times. Now, it is evident that Homer's influence is so great, Homer's influence on Apollonius's work. We see it in every line. First and foremost, the Argonautica, written in the 3rd century BC, and mind you, written in the 3rd century BC, not orally composed, as originally was the case with the poems of Homer. Homer, whoever he was, composed his poems in the 8th century BC. He did not write them down. They were put down in writing much later, well, not much later, but later than the actual existence of Homer. Contrary to that, Apollonius of Rhodes was, of course, literate, and he wrote down his work to begin with. Again, as we said, all of ancient literature was meant to be read aloud. So it really didn't matter whether you were writing prose or you were writing poetry. Your work was meant to be read aloud and listened to. However, the composition itself was a written action. It was set down in writing. Even so, 500 years after Homer, Apollonius writes in the Homeric dialect. So this is the first influence, the greatest of all influences on Apollonius, the Homeric dialect. Think of it. Greek-speaking people in Alexandria are awaiting the publication, say, of an epic poem, and they know that it is not going to be written in the Greek that they speak, the so-called common tongue, the Koine dialect. They know, well, it is an epic poem. It is going to be written in the epic dialect. That is a dialect that was never, to begin with, much more so in the 3rd century BC, a dialect that was never a spoken language. We have already discussed at great length on the characteristics of what the epic dialect is. So it was artificial in the 8th century BC, all the more so in the 3rd century BC, and yet Apollonius writes in that dialect. Why? Because this is the dialect that is commensurate, that is suitable to the meter, the hexameter, the dactylic hexameter, the meter common to all epic poems, be they heroic, didactic. He is loyal to that tradition. Furthermore, the elements that we find in the Argonautica, for example, right at the very beginning, we have a catalogue of all the heroes, all the Argonauts, that is, the heroes who sailed in the ship Argo, a catalogue of some 200 lines, giving great details of those heroes. This, of course, is in imitation of the catalogue that appears in the Iliad, the catalogue, the famous catalogue of the ships which sailed to Troy. Other elements are descriptions of objects of art in poetic form. We already mentioned that that term. It's called an ekphrasis. An ekphrasis is the poetical description of a physical work of art. In the Iliad, it is the famous description of the shield of Achilles. In the Argonautica, we have several such ekphrases, that's the plural. So we have several such descriptions. For example, there is a description of Jason's cloak that he dons when he goes to visit Queen Hypsipyle. So he wears a cloak on which is embroidered a complete story of the building of the city of Thebes, if I recall correctly. So this description is an ekphrasis, which, of course, in turn, affected and influenced poets, Roman poets such as Catullus, and most notably Vergil. So we have Homer directly influencing Apollonius of Rhodes. Another influence of Homer's is the use of similes. There are dozens of similes in the Iliad, and I remind you, and we will see it today, of course, whenever the poet is in the midst of expressing a scene of heightened intensity or of great importance, it is then at the peak of suspense that he will usually employ a simile that so-called, that as it were, delays us and sustains the suspense just in order to increase it even to an even greater degree. For instance, just before that famous catalogue of ships in the Iliad, there are no less than 5 similes. The gathering hosts are compared to birds, to flies, and all this is expressly for the purpose of heightening the emotion, of creating that greater intensity. So we find the same in Apollonius of Rhodes, and we will see it today. That is a short survey of the similarities between Homer and Apollonius of Rhodes. But just as there are points of similarity, there are also points of discrepancy, points of difference. For example, one of the hallmarks of Homeric composition is, of course, repetition. There are many lines that repeat themselves, lines, paragraphs even. Why? Because we learned that that was one of the characteristics of oral poetry. It was, as it were, a mnemonic aid to the aoidos, to the reciter of the poem. Not so in the written epic of Apollonius. There are, in fact, no substantial repetitions. Sure, we have epithets and we have artificial language and grand descriptions of battles and so on and so forth, but we do not see the systematic, methodical repetition of lines, even of paragraphs, as we do in Homer. Also, in terms of the plot itself, Apollonius created something that is entirely alien to Homer. For example, the description of foreign peoples, their customs, the geography of alien lands. This rather reflects Hellenistic perceptions, of course, influenced by the conquests of Alexander, who took the focus out of the little polis that was unified and of an extremely small space, and magnified it 1,000-fold with his expansion south and east, both to Egypt and famously to Persia and even beyond. So the world had suddenly become a much grander place. And this is reflected in Apollonius of Rhodes. The voyage itself is, as it were, a reflection of the Hellenistic occupation with geography, with ethnicity, with anthropology. All these aspects are not found in Homer, or at least not found in the degree of depth that we have them in the Argonautica. And the reception of the Argonautica, that is the way scholars treated it, for many years it was looked down upon. Sure, and even in ancient times, the famous critic, we call him Longinus, who wrote the literary treatise on the Sublime, says, yes, Homer or rather Apollonius resembles Homer very much, and the influence of Homer is very great. But still, wouldn't you rather be Homer than Apollonius? So Apollonius was regarded as too artificial, too imitative of Homer than to be appreciated for his own merits. Of course, in recent decades, that has changed radically, and the true worth of the Argonautica is now unquestionable as an independent literary work, as an epic, great in its own right, of course, building, as all ancient literature, as all literature in general, I would say, building on its predecessors. But it was not only Homer that Apollonius had as a sort, also because Apollonius did not create the myth of Jason and the Argonauts, the myth of the Golden Fleece. Surely not. It was long in existence before him. Even Homer mentions Jason and Medea, because don't forget that the story of the Argonauts took place in mythological time in the generation that preceded the generation of those who fought at Troy. So this must always be remembered, that the myth existed long before Apollonius of Rhodes. It was mentioned by Homer, treated most famously by Euripides in one of his best-known tragedies, surviving tragedies, Medea. But even before that, by Pindar, the poet known for his odes, victory odes and Olympic odes. So in one of Pindar's odes, he gives a full account of the voyages of Argo. So that too was a source of influence on Apollonius. And from these sources, we see the focus on the psychology of the characters, their inner emotions, the exploration of the effect of love on, in this case, a woman, Medea. Also, what characterizes and differentiates Apollonius of Rhodes' epic from that of Homer is that, well, true, both are heroic epics, but the story in the Argonautica is what we would call an initiation myth. What do I mean by that? In it, we have the two main protagonists, Jason and Medea, as youths. They are not fully fledged heroes. He is not a fully fledged hero, nor is she a fully fledged heroine. No, Medea at the time is probably 16 and Jason not much older. So they are only in their infancy, as it were, as epic heroes. It is through the story itself, as the plot is sprawled before us, that they undergo a process of maturation. They become true heroes, or at least to a greater extent than they were at the beginning. And this is why we use the term initiation myth. That is, the hero is initiated into his full character. This is just the beginning. And through the course of the plot, the hero, the heroine will come first of all to know themselves better, and as a result emerge greater persons, full heroes, as it were. Compare that with Achilles, for example. Achilles at the beginning of the Iliad is already the full epic, tragic hero. He has his great merits as also his great demerits, his hamartia, as it were, that error, that flaw in his character that will inevitably bring his own downfall. But from the very beginning, Achilles is Achilles with all his good and bad characteristics. Not so Jason. Jason at the very beginning is not what you would call a heroic, an epic hero or a heroic character. He's very hesitant. He's young, inexperienced. He goes out on a voyage, which is to all purposes a voyage of no return. And he does not really demonstrate any exemplary skills of leadership. He is rather passive at the very beginning, but as the plot evolves, he becomes more mature, more experienced, more authoritative, not to mention the trials and tribulations that Medea undergoes. She, when she first enters the plot in the third book, I will say a word about the structure of the epic in a moment. When she first enters the plot in the third book, she is an innocent 16-year-old girl, a sorceress, true, a follower of Hecate, goddess of sorcery and black arts, as it were. But that is all. When she is infected with the love of Jason, and I use the word infected deliberately, everything turns upside down. Nothing will ever be as it were. She becomes a tragic hero. She will betray her father Aeetes. She will instigate the murder of her own brother Apsyrtos. She will abandon her homeland, and this at 16 years of age. And she will undergo a complete transformation. Now, the Argonautica, an epic poem that consists of 4 books, is modeled, of course, after Homer. However, it is shorter than either the Iliad, of course, and the Odyssey. It has 4 books of substantial length. For example, the 4th book, the 4th and last book, is the longest book that we have in ancient literature. It consists of nearly 2,000 lines of hexameter verse. The poem in its entirety consists of 5,885 hexameter lines, which is less than half of the Iliad, almost half of the Odyssey. So, but still, it is a long poem. It is an epic poem, divided into 4 long books. The first 2 describe Jason's departure from mainland Greece, from Iolcus, his adventures en route to Colchis, and his and the Argonauts' landfall at the river Phasis in Colchis. Then the 3rd book begins the second half of the poem, and that is the great love story between Medea and Jason, Medea's betrayal of her family, King Aeetes, and of her people, the theft, as it were, of the golden fleece with the aid of Medea, and the return voyage to Greece. This occupies the second half of the story. Now, we will begin maybe with the opening lines of the poem, and we will explain the plot as we read. So this is the translation by Peter Green. It is a verse translation. Now, all epic poetry is not easy to read. Even Homer requires adjustment and adaptation on the part of the reader. Hellenistic poetry and epic poetry at that is even more difficult to read because it is filled with allusions, with technical material, as it were, as I said, discussions of anthropology, geography, religion, rituals, customs, and so on and so forth. And also the grammar and syntax itself of the Greek is sometimes frustratingly difficult. When read in translation, this, of course, is made simpler, but still the translation is not very easy to read, but we will read it nonetheless. Again, a great translation by a great scholar. So we open, this is book 1, the first lines. we open, according to tradition, with the proem, the general introduction to the poem, which is lines 1 to 22 here. This is the poem, and in it, of course, at the very beginning, is the invocation of the Muses, in our case, of the Lord of the Muses, of Apollo himself, starting from you, Phoebos. That's a sobriquet, a nickname, an appellation of Apollo, the Lord of the Muses. The deeds of those old-time mortals I shall relate, who, by way of the Black Sea's mouth and through the cobalt dark rocks, at King Peleus's commandment, in search of the golden fleece, drove tight-thwarted Argo. Now, the translation here is excellent for the convoluted style that we have. So, what does it mean? The poet says that he is going to start with Apollo. That is, Apollo will initiate the song. And with the help and assistance of Apollo, he will relate the deeds of those old-time mortals who went in search of the golden fleece and did so by sailing tight-thwarted Argo. Now, Argo is the name of the ship. Tight-thwarted means the ship with good rowing benches. A thwart is a bench in an ancient ship that is in 90 degrees to the side of the ship. It's the benches in the hull of the ship. These are called thwarts. And here it is tight-thwarted Argo. I understand the Greek as Argo with good rowing benches. Again, why? Because it is an epic epithet. It cannot just be Argo. So I'm going to speak about those old-time mortals who sailed Argo with the good rowing benches. They went in search of the golden fleece. All this happened at King Peleus's commandment, and they drove the ship through the cobalt dark rocks. Now, perhaps the most famous event in the Argonautica is the sailing of the Argonautica amid the Bosphorus Straits, where Europe and Asia are so close together that it was imagined in ancient times that the two sides, two rocks, one on each side, were colliding and then receding, colliding and receding. These are the clashing rocks, the cobalt dark rocks. Famously, well, you can see it now between Turkey and Europe, there's no movement of ground. Why? Because once Argo had sailed through them, they remained fixed in place. And there is the passage of the famous strait of the Bosphorus that is with us even to this day. And in order to get to the Black Sea, they had to cross these clashing rocks, and they did so with the help of the gods, of course. Now, for Peleus heard it voiced that in time thereafter, a grim fate would await him, death at the prompting of the man he saw come, one sandaled from folk in the country. So Peleus was the king of the city of Iolcus in mainland Greece. He was not the rightful king. He usurped the throne. The throne belonged to Jason's father, Aeson. So in fact, Peleus was Jason's uncle, cruel uncle, who heard the prophecy that when he should see a one-sandaled man, this would mark the end of his rule, that man would dethrone him. As fate would have it, that one-sandaled man was none other than his nephew, Jason. Whereupon Peleus entrusted him with the suicidal mission of sailing to the ends of the earth to retrieve the golden fleece. The golden fleece, it was not a magical fleece, it had no powers, it was just a symbol. It was the fleece of a golden ram. That in itself was a kind of prodigy, it could fly and speak. And that ram, I will not go into the myth of the ram, you can read it for yourselves, but that ram with Phrixus on his back made it to Colchis, where it was then sacrificed, flayed, and the fleece, the golden fleece, was held sacred and kept in kept on a special tree, guarded by an ever wakeful dragon, that is a serpent. So that was the mission. It is said that when Peleus first saw Jason with one sandal to his foot, asked, what would he do, Jason that is, what would he do if he knew that someone was going to bring about his own death? So Jason replied, I would send them to go fetch the golden fleece. And so Peleus replied, then go and fetch it. So it is, as it were, Jason brought this greatly dangerous adventure upon himself. So Apollonius assumes that we already know this background, and he says here, now singers before my time have recounted how the vessel was fashioned by Argos with the guidance of Athena. So why should I now repeat information that is already known and that was sung by other singers? What I plan to do now is tell the name and family of each hero, describe their long voyage, all they accomplished in their wanderings. May the muses inspire my singing. So this, of course, marks the end of the proem. There's, in fact, a double invocation here in the proem itself. The proem itself is the general introduction. It includes the invocation first of Apollo, Phoebus, and then it ends with an address to the muses. So Apollonius is very clear that he is not going to recount again the story of how the ship was built, that's already known, or of the golden fleece itself. No, he is going to describe first of all, who the heroes were, and then their long voyage and all that they accomplished, there and back again, as it were. And then begins the famous catalogue. First in our record be Orpheus, whom famous Calliope, after bedding Thracian Oiagros, bore, they tell us. So again, this is one of the hallmarks of epic poetry. Genealogy of heroes and the enumeration, the great detail of who they were and where they came from. So just to set things straight, the Argonauts contained all the flower of Grecian heroism, all the famous heroes that ever lived. Orpheus, the greatest of musicians, for example. Jason himself, not yet the hero that he would become, but Jason. Peleus, the father, the mortal father of Achilles. Greatest of them all, Heracles, joins the expedition, only to leave it at the end of book 1, because there is a famous incident there that requires his attention, and he is left behind. But Heracles was one of the Argonauts. And well, there are other 50. So you just have to read the catalog to know that. So they sail away and they start their voyage, encountering strange peoples, great dangers, and they finally make it to Colchis, whereupon they albeit they completed the voyage to their destination, they now have to gain the golden fleece, but that is kept on a special tree guarded by an ever wakeful serpent under the rule of King Aeneid. King Aeneid, a cruel ruler who will not hand over the fleece just because Jason said, look, we've undergone so many adventures, such perilous seas we have crossed, give us the fleece. Well, that's not what Aeneid would do. And the two goddesses, Hera and Athena, know that. And they contrive to assist Jason in his attempt, in his effort to get the fleece. And how will they do that? Well, they decide to make Aeneid's daughter, Medea, fall madly in love with Jason, because that love would induce her, impel her to assist him with her sorcery, with her magical powers. Without them, Jason's efforts would be in vain. He would be doomed to failure. And so in book 3, we begin with, because this is in fact the other half of the poem, we begin with another invocation, this time to the muse of love elegy, that is Erato, the muse of love elegy, of not epic poetry, but of love songs. And that is why he addresses her. Now come, Erato, stand by me and tell me how Jason brought the fleece back from Colchis to Iolcus. So this now marks the second half. Books 1 and 2, we reached Colchis. Now books 3 and 4, we must acquire the fleece and return to Greece with it. Through the love of Medea. So all this, Jason's success and the bringing of the fleece back home to Iolcus, happened through the love of Medea. For you yourself belong to Cyprus's team. That is, Erato belongs to the team of Cypris. And of course, Cypris is Aphrodite. You bewitch with your cares of passion unbroken virgins. Your very name's erotic. That is the name Erato, that's where we get the word erotic from, right? From Eros, the god of love. So we will not read the self-deliberation of Juno, that is Hera, and of Athena. We will go straight to the description of Medea's falling in love with Jason. And of course, to secure that love, Hera and Athena decide to address Aphrodite, asking her to talk to her son Eros and make him shoot the arrow of doomed, damned love at Medea, because that, they know, will necessitate her help to Jason. She will have no option but to assist him. So there is a very elaborate description here of how Athena and Hera decide on the proper course of action. Aphrodite, of course, agrees. And then what happens is this. On the, shall we say, earthly terrestrial level, the heroes, Jason and several of the Argonauts, disembark from Argo and go to the palace of Aeneid, where they have an interview with the king. They present themselves, they state their purpose of arrival, and sitting beside her father is Medea. Jason is in front of them speaking, and then Eros descends from heaven and comes himself unseen by anyone to that same palace. And we will read now this description of what happens. Meantime, through a gray mist came Eros, invisible, an itch, a sting, like the gadfly that swarms up against grazing heifers. And that's known by ox herds as the breeze. That is the fly that stings the cattle. It's called the gadfly. Ox herds call it the breeze. And it is especially annoying because its bite is painful, and this is what Eros is compared to. So you will see, because this now is a central point, this short passage is a point of central importance in the entire story. It will be accompanied by imagery, metaphor, simile, at the very height of the action. Why? To emphasize, to accentuate the importance and the intensity of the moment. So, under the hall door lintel, he quickly strung his bow and pulled from the quiver a shaft unhandselled. So he is there at the door, standing on the lintel. He is stringing the bow, and from his quiver, that is the box on his shoulder that contains the arrows, he takes out an arrow that has not been used before, an unhandselled shaft, quick with trouble. So quick with trouble, that in the original is a description of the arrow. The arrow itself is filled with trouble. All these, of course, are marks of the deadly consequences of the love of Medea and Jason, because we know that was one of the most tragic love stories, if we can call it love story, that ever were. It began ill and it ended worse. We know what happened in the end. Sure, Medea helped Jason and they retrieved the golden fleece and they married, but the end was bitter and cruel. Medea was abandoned by Jason. She killed Jason's intended other bride, as well as her and Jason's two children. So there's a famous Latin line, hexameter also, finis quab origine pendit, and the end depends upon the beginning, or rather, and the end hangs from, pendit, ab origine, from the beginning. So what began in such a fashion, such an ominous fashion, could not but end tragically. So then stepping swiftly, he crossed the threshold unseen, glancing sharply around, and crouched a tiny figure at Jason's very feet, settled his arrow's notch to mid-bowstring, then with both arms drew the bow and let fly at Medea, striking her heart speechless. So the effect is instantaneous. All of a sudden, Medea is speechless. Back up then he darted out of the high-roofed hall, cackling with laughter. So he knows the damage that he has just inflicted on Medea, and it makes him laugh. And what happens then? Like a flame, that shaft burnt under her maiden heart. Endless, bright, open glances, she darted at Jason. All of a sudden, Jason appears in a different light. She looks at him and lowers her eyes on and off. Her breath fetched quick and labored from her heaving breast. All else was forgotten. Her spirit flooded over in that sweet ecstasy. And now we await to see what is going to happen, what the effects will be. No, there is now an extended simile that will amplify and emphasize the effect of the burning of love in Medea's heart. And we will read it. As a woman, a hireling whose business is the spinning of wool, will heap dry kindling around a smoldering firebrand, to tease out a bright flame under her lean-to when it's still dark. So we have here a description of a poor woman in the early hours of dawn, when it is still quite dark outside. She kindles a fire from a small firebrand. It's smoldering, and she needs to set up a fire. Crouching close over it, and the flame amazingly flares up strong from that little brand. So it began as a small thing, and all of a sudden it is kindled into a great fire. Consumes every scrap of the kindling. So just as the fire begins as a small flame, and then it consumes all the kindling, that is the fire, that is the wood that is there for the burning. So love, the destroyer. So we would like to think of love as something nice, something that we aspire. No, love, the destroyer, blazed in a coil around her heart. Her mind's resistless anguish. Now, this is what I was aiming at. Now flushed her soft cheeks, now drained them of all color. This is the very same line that we find in Dido's description when she is about to stab herself with the sword. What did it say there? It said that her cheeks were now here. Her trembling cheeks stained with red spots, yet pallid with approaching death. So here we have Medea. Her cheeks were flushed and then drained of all color. So it's the same description, and we know that Vergil probably borrowed or was inspired by Apollonius from this very line. And it is equally tragic because we know what will be the end of Medea's love. She will die, or rather, she will not die, but the consequences will be tragic. She will murder her sons. She will betray her father. Complete disasters. And the effect, the initial effect is the same as the physical effect is the same as the effect that we read in the description of Dido. Flushed her soft cheeks and now drained them of all color. And this again is the beginning, the very beginning that marks the tragic end of this epic. Great. So this was, I know, an unsatisfactory survey of the Argonautica. We could have devoted several sessions to it, as we did with the Iliad, the Odyssey, and of course the Aeneid, but that would be enough for just a very general impression. As I said, next week, which is going to be our last session, we will sum up what it is that we did here, and I will also explain and give greater details about the exam, and there will be time for you to ask questions if you have any. Prepare them in advance, and I will be only too glad to answer them. And at this point, I will also thank you for attending both physically and from afar, and listening to what it is that I had to say about these masterpieces, which will always remain jewels in our literary heritage. So I will see you all next week. You're welcome.